Welcome back to the Annihihate podcast, a forum to discuss and combat student hate. Today we have another inspirational and compassionate guest, Dr. Cheryl James Ward. Dr. Ward is the superintendent of the San Diego Union High School District, or SDUHSD. I'm proud to say that she is my superintendent as well as the superintendent for over 13,000 other students in our district. Dr. Ward is an incredibly accomplished woman of color in both education as STEM, and she is working to incorporate an inclusive, tolerant, and anti-racist culture for students in my school district, which encompasses 10 schools, all high schools and middle schools. Like many districts around the country, we have unfortunately had several student hate-related incidents recently, which Dr. Ward has addressed swiftly and with love and understanding. Today's podcast will cover a variety of talking points, but ultimately we strive to answer the questions: is hate learned? How can we increase awareness about and combat hate in younger kids? What resources exist for students looking to better understand other backgrounds? And what resources exist for students who feel like they have been targeted either inadvertently or maliciously or discriminated against? So hi, Dr. Ward. Thank you so much again.
Hello.
Thank you so much again for taking time out of your day to be here. I'm sure you're very busy. So I mentioned a brief biography in the intro, but I don't think it does you justice whatsoever. So can you just give a brief introduction of yourself?
All right. Well, I'll start from the beginning, right? Starting from the beginning, I'll start from my college life. So I got my bachelor's in applied mathematics from UC Santa Barbara. Then went on actually with two other degrees, which I never finished when I decided to become a teacher, a master's in mathematics and an MBA. And then my doctorate, of course, in education administration from USC. So thereafter, or within that span of time, I went to work for NASA Jet Propulsion Lab on the Magellan Project, which was a spacecraft that went to Venus. And so I started there as a software engineer, and my job was really the integration of components at the specifications level to ensure that we were integrating pieces properly. And then I did a little work at Hughes Aircraft, actually, on a Navy submarine system where I did programming. And I left that I took a leave from Hughes to go teach because I always wanted to teach. So I became a math teacher, LAUSD. And then from there, really just because of my love of kids, and I had a calling to be a dean of discipline. So I was a dean for a couple of years, a vice principal for a year, a principal for several years, 7 in total. And then became a director supervising our lowest performing elementary and middle schools in Long Beach Unified, 15,000 kids in that area. And I left that because I had kids, and my husband actually was a state administrator. A state administrator is a superintendent and school board. They act as both. And that happens when a district goes into receivership. They get a state administrator. A district goes into receivership when they can't pay their bills. So he became a state administrator. We moved to Northern California. I started coaching schools north of Oakland and school principals. All of my schools did exceptionally well under my coaching. Then we moved to San Diego. And in San Diego, I spent 1 year at Capri Elementary School, but my kids were still young, and San Diego Unified knocked at my door to come there. So I went to San Diego, I'm sorry, not San Diego Unified, San Diego State. So I went to San Diego State, and I was a professor there for about 11 years, and then 3 years professor emeritus, which means I'm still working there, chairing dissertation committees. But my work there really took me to starting an online master's in educational leadership with a focus on technology, which after 3 years became 11th in the country. And also working with our Chinese educators in China, and starting the Chinese American Leadership Symposium, where we had visitors from China yearly, and became the university liaison, working with educators in China and doing lots of research and consulting there. And then starting my research around 20, 30 schools I actually went to E3 Civic High, which was noted one of the most innovative schools in the nation, and ended up being CEO there. And from there, I came here to San Diego Union High School District. So that's just a little bit about that side. I have two kids, a senior in high school who is valedictorian, and also just got early acceptance into UPenn Wharton School. And my daughter is a freshman at USC in the World Business Bachelor's Program. They both speak three languages, English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And that's
Wow,
me.
that is amazing. So obviously you are incredibly accomplished, which is evident. Sorry that this keeps getting away. Okay, which is evident in your bio. I think that's something that I was most interested in. So you worked as a software engineer for NASA, but then you kind of shifted to education. So what drew you to education?
I always wanted to teach. So going to NASA was like a sidebar. I hate to say it that way, but I always wanted to teach. And so I ended up going to NASA because I was recruited. And
Mhm.
actually, when I went to teach to interview, and the principal told me how much money I was going to make, I just cried and I told her I couldn't take the job. I'm so sorry, I can't take the job. So, but from the age of 12, I wanted to be a teacher. I used to play school in my garage and just invite the neighbors to come in the summertime and just be the teacher.
That's so like endearing. I can't believe you did that for free.
Mhm. That's what I love to do.
I can tell. I think that it's so important that you do all of this different like educational outreach. Was that always where you wanted your career in education to go? Like for your skills to be allocated to people who like didn't have access to super high quality education?
So it was just authentic, right? And so everything just kind of happened. To become a dean, that just happened.
Mhm.
Um, my work as a director happened because I was hired at a school in Pasadena and was able to turn it around in 1 year, and then moved to the largest flagship in the district and in Pasadena. But my folks in Long Beach said, "Oh, no, 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 we need her to come back here. We need her help. We need her help." So I went back to Long Beach and again was able to just repeat the work, right? So we went from one of the lowest performing schools in the district to one of the highest performing schools in Long Beach. Um, and so it was just organic, something that happened. Um, but for me, the reality is always making a difference. When I wake up every day, my job is to make a difference. My job is to make the world better each and every day, however I can do that. And so that's kind of like how these things happened. When I was at the university, I saw the need for our online program. That's why I started that. When I was in Northern California, actually, before I went, when I was in Long Beach, I saw the need for coaching principals. And that's why I did that work when I went up north. And even when I came back to Long Beach, I did a lot of coaching. I was a lead coach in in the Los Angeles area while I was still a full-time professor at San Diego State. Right. So it's just where I see a need for things um, that I just try to do the work where
Yeah,
I see the need.
I think seeing that need is very important and like putting in the work is also important. With respect to your current job as the superintendent of SDUHSD, with regards to like the hate incidents, hate and stuff like that, there's definitely a need there. So what are like the initiatives? Because you talk about need and then you talk about like working on things. So what are like the current action items to deal with the need in SDUHSD?
All right. So before I even got here, starting in September, they started with diversity, equity, and inclusion training, which I love. One of the classes that I taught at San Diego State, I taught um, organization and change, school community relations, school law, and finance. And one of the other classes that I taught was uh, cultural culture and leadership at our doc level, dissertation level. And I taught that class because one day a professor came to me upset And she said that one of our doctoral students, that's a doctoral student, came to her upset because they were sharing who was on their dissertation committees. So before you can graduate with a PhD or any doctorate level position degree, you have to do a terminal project dissertation, right? And you have a dissertation committee. And so this person had 3 African Americans on her dissertation committee, and she was also African American. And somebody said, well, that's not fair. You're going to get preferential treatment, special treatment, because all 3 people on your committee are African American and you're African American. And I thought, how crazy is that? Does that mean that all this time that if you were white and you had 3 white people on your dissertation committee, you were getting preferential treatment and extra help? And so I thought, we need to fix this. And that's how I started teaching the culture and diversity class, actually, the leadership class at San Diego State. And so the work was about understanding who we serve, how to serve them best to ensure that all kids could be successful. And so that was kind of the work there. And that brings me to here. And ask me that question one more time.
Yeah, so you talk about the need and working to fix things, working on things that are needed. And with regards to hate, what are like action items to kind of limit the amount of hate or stop hate incidents in our district?
Good. So the diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's something that I've done at the university level, and that's something that we're doing across the district. That happened before I got here. We're going to continue that work. We're committed to that work. And then next year we take it from groups. This year we have groups at each campus, including staff, administrators, staff, teachers, administrators, like groups of 10 people. Next year it goes school-wide. We continue that work. And so we're committed to continuing to learn about who we serve, to learn best how to serve our kiddos, all of our kiddos, to ensure that they all have high outcomes, to ensure that they all feel comfortable, welcomed each and every day. So we have that going on. We're going to continue with that. And I'm going to just remind me, I have to talk about next week with the DEI work. But we also have our No Place for Hate. We had No Place for Hate in several schools before I got here. We're going to go district-wide No Place for Hate, but not district-wide just so we could say we're No Place for Hate, but in actions. So really having leadership conferences and training in the summer for our students to be leaders in the No Place for Hate work. Setting up district-wide days for the No Place for Hate commitment, and then our activities, and then having conversations across the district with our leadership teams to really understand our individual sites and how we support them in our No Place for Hate work. Then we are going to be meeting with community members to understand what they're seeing, what they're hearing. And then the work that happens on a daily basis is me being out in schools. So my very first day, the very first thing that I did was visit CCA. I believe that the job of a superintendent is to be in schools, right? To understand our kids, to talk to kids, to talk to teachers, to know what's happening in classrooms. Because that's the only way you can ensure that the best things are happening in classrooms everywhere for all kids. I can't hear from other people. I need to see it myself. So that work will continue. And then I'm starting equity walks with my executive cabinet. So every other Tuesday, we'll go out to schools and we'll observe what's happening in classrooms. Where are kids seated? If there's only one kid of color in the class, where's the child seated? How are we engaging with kids in classrooms? If there's only one kid of color, how are we engaging in that with the student? Are they sitting in the back? Are we making sure that they get the attention and the resources that they need? Are they being heard? Are they being seen? What's happening in the classroom? What does the classroom look like? What's the classroom talk about? How are they sitting? Are they sitting tall, feeling like they belong? Or are they trying slouched over, like maybe I don't belong here? So equity walks is another big thing. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and No Place for Hate. Training with diversity, equity, inclusion. Training with No Place for Hate, with student leader volunteers. Continued work with our, continued work with our equity walks, and then looking at data, including what we get from our equity walks to improve our instruction.
That's so important. And I think going back to something that you said about the equity walks, things like where students are seated, stuff like that, like where students of color are seated, are things that I would have never thought about. And do you think that like better understandings of different cultures or backgrounds will help with inequity or any kind of hate? So like in other words, are incidents or just even like small instances of inequity, like students of color not being integrated fully into a classroom setting, are some of these incidents due to ignorance or preconceived biases?
Both, right? So we all have biases. And if we don't understand those biases, we could do great harm to each other.
Mhm.
So it's to, number one, understand who we are, understand our own internal biases and how we keep those biases in check, and then how we begin to learn about each other. I think the more you learn and know about a person, the less biased you are toward them because
Definitely.
you know more, right?
Mhm.
So the job is to engage in activities and training to teach us to be less biased, but also to learn about other individuals, to learn about who we serve, to know who we serve, to understand their individual challenges, their triumphs, and then to ensure that our instruction really meets the needs, the diverse needs of our kiddos.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that in a lot of cases with inequity too, change starts with authority figures like teachers and
Oh,
stuff like that.
you got that right. You
But
got that right.
but do you think that some of these resources for learning about other backgrounds, other cultures are also like accessible to students? And how would students be able to access that?
Yes, 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 yes. So some of that, and the state is starting with their ethnic studies courses,
Mhm.
and so those are going to be very helpful. And some people are afraid of ethnic studies, and I'm not sure why. Let me just say what ethnic studies courses are about or should be about, and that is we are a pluralistic society. America is made up and has been made up of people from many different backgrounds, right? And so it's important to hear all of those stories. Every story is important. So when we think about the Americas, and I'm just going to go in alphabetical order, right? We have African Americans, we have Asian Americans, we have European Americans from the from the fringe countries, like so from countries where so the European Americans that came here were usually from England, right? And that was the first group that came. But then there were some others who were mistreated as well.
Mhm.
So European Americans, Jewish Americans, Latin Americans, Native Americans. That's America. All of those groups make up America. They make up the deep history of America. Now we have more Americans as of late, too, right?
Mhm.
But when you think of the deep history of America, those were the original Americans over the last, from the inception of the country in the late 1700s to the mid 20th century. So it's important to hear their stories. If we know
Definitely.
their stories, if we hear their stories, then we become a better America. And
Mhm.
that's what the ethnic studies classes are about. That also means that when we're in our literature classes, we should make every effort under the sun to ensure that we have literature that represents as many different groups as we can. The kid does not have to be seated in the class for you to say, I should look at literature from this group of kiddos,
Definitely.
right?
Mhm.
So we should have a broad spectrum of literature that we look at. And then when we get to US history is not a monolithic experience, right? And so again, we should be looking at history through the lens of all the different Americans, their stories, how the policies, social and monetary policies affected each group of people in the United States, because that will also help us to understand where we are today in the United States and why we are where we are today in the United States. And what does that do for our kiddos? Not only does it help us to understand, respect, and celebrate each other better, but it also helps us to become more critical, analytical thinkers, because we understand that issues are complex, that they are multidimensional, and with that, we can solve problems in the future better because we understand that things are not just one way. We understand the complexity and have the ability to think about things in complex manners.
For sure. And I think that ultimately all of this understanding of different cultures, different backgrounds, different like stories, as you said, comes back to this idea of combating hate because like ultimately hate is not really hate. It's fear of the unknown, fear of people who are different from you. And that is definitely a super effective way of exposing biases, getting rid of biases. But do you think that like we can do the flip side? Do you think that compassion and understanding is also something that can be taught?
I do believe so. I do believe it is taught. Hate is taught, compassion is taught, love is taught, all of that is taught. Um, there are some people who on the fringe who are very hateful for whatever reason, but that whatever reason is something that happened to them, something that impacted them, right? But again, there's that 0.001% out there who are for whatever reason just that way. But for the rest of us, the 99.99% is taught. It is taught, right? So we are taught how to love. We are taught how to be compassionate. We are taught how to hate. We are taught how to not see things, to pretend that things don't exist. All of that is taught. And so it's our job to teach through example, to teach through teach through curriculum, to teach through instructional practices, how to be loving, compassionate individuals. That goes back to those equity walks, right? So and I'll give you two examples. When I was a very young teacher, either my first or second year as a math teacher in LAUSD, I had a student that came from Russia, and her English was not that good. And she was a little shy because, she was the only kid from Russia in our class. So what did I do? I had her sit in the front of the class, and I made sure that she had buddies, and I made sure that I spent extra time with her because she was new. And I wanted our class to see how we embrace people, how we support people. And what did that do for the rest of the class? They learned how to support and embrace our new person in the class. So we have to be the model. We have to provide the instructional support pieces. And in high school, the curriculum, when we provide curriculum that represents all of the kiddos in our schools, then we're saying, okay, everybody's important. And it's important to have resources that represent all of us because everybody's important. That's why we have the resources.
Mm-hmm. And then going back to your example about the girl from Russia, that is so important to have like a model, somebody to show or teach compassion, understanding, acceptance. How can we as students help teach compassion and combat hate?
Mm-hmm.
How do we
Mm-hmm.
bring up dialogue, which can be painful, especially after hate incidents?
Mm-hmm. So the two parts to that. So
Mm-hmm.
next week we had a situation on January 1 at SDA at
Yeah.
3:55 in the morning, right? Somebody goes and writes the N-word and an homophobic slur
Mm-hmm.
in front of the school, just all over, sprays up the school.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do? One, we recognize it. We recognize it might be a person on the fringe, but it happened. And so there's some hate there. And when that happens, it stirs up, it triggers all the emotions that people have who have been suffering and experiencing this.
Yes.
So what do we need to do? As a staff, as a district staff, to understand that situation, to hear the stories of our kiddos, and to provide opportunities for them to share their feelings, their
Mm-hmm.
thoughts. So one thing is for us to provide opportunities for our students to share their feelings, to share their thoughts. Another is to teach them how to be the leaders. We want them to lead. And so in our schools, we have many different clubs. At CCA, we have a couple of culture clubs, different culture clubs, kindness clubs, led by kids. So the thing is to provide our students with as many opportunities as possible to lead these kindness clubs, to lead these cultural understanding clubs, and then to provide them with training, right? So this summer we do have training from the ADL, and we'll tie that with the Anti-Defamation League, and we'll tie that with the work that we're getting from the San Diego County Office of Ed on diversity, equity, and inclusion, to provide training for our kiddos in how to be anti-bias and how to be allies for each other. And so that they can then begin to train others in their schools in this area. And then, of course, Michi, the work that you're doing is very important, right? Getting the voice out, giving kids opportunities to share their stories. That work is very important.
Thank you so much. I think that ultimately, in a lot of cases, like, yes, having a model, having an authority figure, that stuff is so important. But authority figures can't always be around to teach students how to be compassionate, how to be like not hateful, how to be anti-racist and stuff like that. So I think that students using their voices is so important. It empowers other people. It creates this ripple effect. So how can students access resources to help other students or like learn about different backgrounds? Just all of the resources that you talk about are so important. So how can students access them?
So there are a number of ways. When we visit like the Anti-Defamation League website, there
Mhm.
are resources there. When we visit um, uh, NAACP website, there are resources there. So we just have to think about um, what types of organizations we want to be affiliated with, and check their websites, because there are always resources on those websites.
Mhm.
The California Department of Education has a list of recommended literature. It's extensive and exhaustive. So exhaustive. So you can always check there for um, different resources in literature that is available to our kiddos. And guess what? TikTok, things like that. There are also resources, but you got to be careful, right? Because it could be
Mhm.
crazy. So you have to understand who those individuals are that are putting those resources out. But the thing is to think about which organizations you want to be affiliated with. And then there are resources, there are a number of resources on the websites that we can access. And then also, like I said, at the state level, there are resources that can be accessed.
That's so important. Having resources widely available to students who, like you said, definitely have the opportunity to change their beliefs towards certain groups or about like certain things, ideologies, and stuff like that. I think besides like deliberate hate issues, like the recent graffiti at SDA, there's definitely other. I don't want to like try to make these insignificant, but they're definitely on a smaller level than things like deliberate graffiti, like microaggressions, or like you said, things that I didn't even think of, like students of color being placed at the back of the classroom or not allowed to fully engage in the classroom environment. Can that also be corrected through education and through using like the available resources that you mentioned earlier?
Uh, how we place kids in classrooms?
Not necessarily like that specifically, just more about microaggressions
Oh,
against like
microaggressions. So
students.
microaggressions are big. Oh my God, microaggressions are huge. They happen all the time, right? And so again, the diversity, equity, and inclusion training helps us to understand those microaggressions, and it helps us to keep ourselves in check. Um, Otherwise, they will continue to happen because everyone has internal biases. It's just a fact. And so it is understanding our own biases and becoming anti-bias, making a commitment to yourself and the rest of the world that you will be anti-bias, that you will be anti-racist. That's a commitment that we make. And that's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. And it is being consciously always thinking about your thinking, to live in that metacognitive world where you're understanding what's going on in your head. When somebody walks in the door, what do you think? And checking yourself. Did I think the right thing? Did I think the wrong thing? And why did I think that? So It's a lifelong journey. And kids really need to be taught how to be anti-bias, right? It's not just something that you naturally do. And so that's why the work that we'll be doing this summer, the next summer, and hopefully forever, as we have new kids come into the secondary level, go through the training so that they can continue to work with the rest of our kiddos on this work of being anti-bias and an upstander, supporting each other. And we're seeing those no place for hate schools in our elementary schools. So the kiddos are coming to our middle schools looking for the no place for hate classes, the programs, like, where is it? What are we doing? Right? So that's very important, but it must be taught, Michi. It must be taught for most people. For a few
Mhm.
people, they're just kind of born that way. But for the majority of us, we're not. And so we have to be
Definitely.
taught those things.
Yeah. And for the like the metacognitive thinking that you were talking about, it's definitely not natural for basically almost everybody. Do you think it would be easier if like students were to talk with other students about that, maybe a safe space to talk about like personal biases, how to correct that? Do you think that could work to
That would work with facilitation. And that's
okay.
where the kiddos who are trained to facilitate
Mhm.
really come into play. Some of the PALS work is around that facilitation, but really just facilitating those discussions, because what we know is for us to grow and become a community where we really care and love each other, it's not about blame. It's not about blame. So we cannot get into the blame game. It's about understanding how we feel, understanding each one of us, and then doing our best to ensure that everybody feels loved, embraced, and a part of the community, a part of the community. And so, what do we need to do to ensure that that happens? Um, what might I have done that wasn't so nice, right? And that maybe I didn't even know I did, right? So when we talk to each other, we get to understand each other better, and then we can become better human beings if we make a commitment to becoming better human beings, right? That's a commitment. And it's a lifelong commitment. You really have to stay on the journey each and every day. But guess what? The longer you're on the journey and the more you're committed to the journey, the easier it gets. The
Mhm.
easier it gets, right? And I know if people are really on the journey by the company they keep. When I have a party, you'll see everybody at my house. You'll see people from every different background. My neighbor across the street came to one of my parties. He moved since then. And he said to me the next day, I have never been to a party that was so diverse, that was so multicultural, where there were just people from every different background. And I kind
Mhm.
of looked at him because I was like, well, that's me. I mean, that's who I am. I mean, and then I thought about it. I said, everybody's not that way, right?
That's
So
true.
when you go to a party, you should see people from every background. That tells you something
Mhm.
about the person's um, uh, experiences with other individuals, right? The person's sometimes the willingness to learn about others. And sometimes people say, well, I really don't know anybody from that group or that group. Well, then we got to go out our way to
Mhm.
learn about, to meet people from different backgrounds, right? That's our job. Go out our way to meet them,
Mhm. I
to
think
learn about them.
yeah, that's so true. I never really thought about it that way, but the diversity of the company that one keeps definitely influences like any preconceived notions, their beliefs about certain groups of people. Do you think that that can kind of be done in an educational setting, like some kind of committee or a group of students that's very diverse, so that they can maybe first just like associate themselves with people of different groups and be more compassionate, be more accepting, that stuff. But do you think that there could be a committee of diverse students and stuff like that to increase education about all of these different backgrounds, these different stories?
I do, I do. And so I know at Torrey Pines, they just started, they have a, next year, they'll have a um, diversity commissioner, right?
Mm,
And so their job is to really provide opportunities for
mhm.
kids to engage in diverse events, activities, right?
Yeah.
And so um, we need to purposefully do things like that, purposefully through our ASBs, through our BSUs, our Latinx, our Asian Pacific Islander clubs. All of our clubs begin to have diversity individuals and to join different clubs, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm African American, I should also be in the Latinx club, the Asian Pacific Islander club. I want to be in all the clubs, right? Learn about all the people. That's what I want to do. So putting ourselves out there too is very important, and having a another committee from all the different clubs. You have another committee where representatives from all the clubs come together, and that's another club, right?
Yeah.
So that the information is shared throughout the clubs, and there are opportunities for everyone to do things together. I believe that that's very important to create all the events for the year, to recognize the different months, and to have activities for the different months, and to do those together.
Yeah.
Right. And so all of that's important, but these things are intentional. And they can come from our kiddos, but they should also come from our school sites as well, right? So it should be coming from two directions to make sure that we're doing the most that we can to support our kiddos. And not only to support our kiddos, but to ensure humanity, to ensure the future of humanity. Because if people are cruel to each other, we will not have a humanity for long. It just can't happen, right? And you said something up front, Michi, about racism being around hate and fear. That's just the bottom line. It's around hate and fear. And so we can't extend humanity if we're fearful of one another, if we hate one another.
Definitely.
And so, for me, some of it is selfish, because I do want to ensure that society survives, that humanity survives. And humanity is actually a little different than society, because humanity means that you care about people, that you care about the humanness. And I think the humanness is about love, respect, and uplifting each other. And it's not fear. It's not worried about, oh, well, if I do this, what's going to happen? Or are they going to do this? Or are they going to take? That's not love. That's not even a good way to live, right? And so we've got to get everybody, or as many people as we can, to that place.
Yeah, and I think that having everybody together, or just having a sense of community in general, breeds this humanity. It breeds compassion and stuff like that. And you talk about like school-wide events, recognizing the different months, which is so important. And I remember in elementary school, throughout all like 6 years of me being in elementary school, we had an event. We had multiple different events that were based around community, but one of the ones that stood out to me as a student of color was Heritage Night, which is basically where you would have individual countries and volunteers who have family in that country, who are from that country, stuff like that, would make like native food and have education about that. And I feel like I am not alone in saying this, but I felt incredibly seen at those events. And is there any way that we can like implement that in high school, community events that make students of color feel seen and recognized and promote education?
That's a great idea, right? As you were saying that, I was like, do we really need to do that in high school? Yes. That's something that we can work on. Might not happen this year, but it will happen.
That's
and
great.
especially if you keep reminding me, it'll happen, right?
Yeah, I just love this idea of community fostering humanity, because a lot of times like hate is kind of bred in the individual, and compassion is bred with like in a community, multiple people, acceptance, it's all bred in a community. And I think that's so important. As like Annihihate as an organization is very committed to this approach, and I'm really, really happy to see that you and other authority figures are definitely committed to this as well. What actions, because this, a lot of it, it's going to take like a little bit to implement, it's not going to happen immediately. What actions can individual students take right now?
Right now, get involved. Join your ASB with the and when you join, make sure that you are advocating for the diversity activities and events. If you're part of a heritage club, promote or advocate for another club where all the clubs come together. Uh, Advocate for activities that throughout the year to uplift and represent different groups of individuals, right? Advocate for um, different classes, courses, I should say, that allow us to learn more about each other, right? Students are the most important part of school and have the best voice when it comes to advocating for different classes, right? So the class at SDA, the ethnic literature class, that's because students asked for it, right? So advocate, be huge advocates for what you believe to be important as we move forward. Be the change, be the change, and volunteer for different activities. Like you started your podcast. How special is that, right? So do things, put yourself out there, be an example, be an upstander, stand up for each other. You know, when we have the see, hear, sense, say something, see, hear, sense, say something, right? If it's wrong, see, hear, sense, say it, right? So, and the more we do that, the more we become the community we want to be.
That's so
The
important.
more each student does that, the more we become that.
So overall, I think that all of this, well, most of it, a lot of bigger actions can be taken by people like on the school board, stuff like that. I think that overall, though, the student voice plays like a huge role, if not the sole role, in enacting major change, because like student advocacy for certain things, it empowers other students to advocate for similar or the same things, and it creates this huge ripple effect of students asking for things, much like at SDA with the ethnic literature class. And I just think that's really important. And I think that you, as a superintendent, have just been so amazing in respecting students' voices, respecting their opinions about these really like complicated, sensitive issues. You're just incredibly inspirational and compassionate, and I'm really, really glad that as a superintendent, as somebody who has the power to change this stuff, that you are incredibly committed to combating hate. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Michi. I really appreciate it. I am honored and privileged. Thank you so much.